I grew up playing video games with my dad. I didn't know how to read yet, so my dad read every single line of dialogue and quest objective for me. When I needed to go to a certain building, he'd write the name down on a piece of paper, and I'd have to match the letters one by one to the name on the screen to make sure I was in the right place. When I failed a mission and my characters died in battle, I cried. So I was only 4 years old, but I was already exploring fantasy worlds and meeting new people, even if I couldn't understand them. When I finally entered elementary school, I wrote about my characters in game and how excited they were to reach the next level, or how beautiful they looked in their new costume, or how they were finally ready to take on the final boss. I knew these characters weren't real. I knew I wasn't actually a magical wizard in real life, but I was still so attached to these characters and the worlds they lived in. When I was in elementary school, I had a hard time finding kids who played games like I did. But nowadays, everyone plays video games, or at least knows of someone who does. From mobile games like Candy Crush and Pokemon Go, to League of Legends and Counter-Strike, to the phenomenon that is Fortnite. But how do these video games actually affect us? Are they just brainless toys meant to pass the time? Are they machines meant to desensitize us to violence? Or are they tools to help us increase our coordination and reflexes? When people think of video games, they don't really consider them life-changing or impactful on a global scale. And yet, with so many people playing video games, shouldn't they have some sort of worldwide effect? Today in America, it can feel like our whole world is divided, like we can't even choose between different ice cream flavors without arguing for days on end. Part of the problem is that it's so hard to see things the way the other side does. We all go through life differently, and all the differences that we face change our perspective on the world. So to understand where someone is coming from means understanding what it's like to walk in their shoes. But how do we do that? Well, what we've normally done is listen. We listen to their stories and books and movies and interviews, but as we can see by looking around us, it's not enough. Listening is passive. If we really want to understand someone, we have to understand what it's like to literally walk in their shoes. But that just doesn't seem possible now, does it? We can't just stop everything to be someone else for a day or a month or a year. And yet, when we play video games, we do. The Last of Us was released in 2013. In the game, you play as Joel Miller, in the middle of the apocalypse, escorting a young girl named Ellie. As of April 2018, The Last of Us sold more than 17 million copies and has won more than 240 awards, including 20 different Game of the Year awards. Why? Because as Jason Sheehan from NPR.org puts it, it's one of the most moving, affecting, and satisfying stories you'll find anywhere. At the beginning of the game, Joel loses his daughter. They finally make it to the outskirts of the town, barely escaping the chaos and violence of the streets as the zombie apocalypse starts. And just when they think they're safe, his daughter is shot by a guard. You're with him as he's holding his daughter in his arms, weeping over her. She's crying out in pain, and he's begging her to stay with him, but there's nothing he can do. The scene lasts only 2 minutes, but for those who have played the game, it is unforgettable. As you continue through the game, you really begin to understand Joel. After all, you're playing as him. You're making his choices, and you've been with him through one of the most difficult parts of his life. And you're with him now as he's trying to help this strange girl who reminds him so much of his own daughter. It is the emotional impact behind it that makes The Last of Us one of the greatest video games of all time. So if a video game can make us feel that much for a fictional character, what can it do when the story is real? Take, for example, Spent. It's a free browser game with a simple premise. You only have $1,000. How do you make it through the month? It was created for the urban ministries of Durham to help people understand what it's like to live in poverty and to encourage them to help other people in their community. Dana Ruggiero at Basketball University tried to study the effectiveness of spent and whether it actually taught people about poverty. She compared scores on a test about homelessness from those who read about homelessness and those who played spent. Those who played spent, not only did they score higher, but they retained that knowledge for a longer period of time. Even more so, just a month ago, a paper was published by researchers at Stanford University investigating whether a video game, specifically one created in virtual reality, affected empathy. Empathy is our ability to understand someone else's thoughts, feelings, and conditions from their point of view. Empathy is what allows us to cooperate with people, and without it, we fail to work together. What the researchers found is that immersive mediums, like video games and virtual reality, mediums that force us to go through the situations, resulted in higher levels of self-reported empathy, and they were more likely to take action, like signing petitions and voting. So the immersion that video games provide really does help. There's no other medium where you have a direct effect on the outcome. You can't change what happens in a book. You can't change what happens in a movie. But if you want to get to the end of the game, you have to make the choices to get there. So the next time you see someone playing a video game, maybe ask them, what's the story about? Who's your favorite character? What's the goal you're trying to accomplish? And while before you might have thought they were wasting their life, they might actually be living another life entirely. All of that through the safety of a video game. Thank you.